we can often doubt ourselves or even lose interest in our exercise and goals due to the fact that we literally have no record or visual information to reference for future workouts and attempts at PBs. So we start to lose interest in this imaginary, non-existent program that we have in our heads. Hello and welcome to another vlog on YouTube and podcast on Spotify by the Fit Minds podcast. Coach Mariah here. Today we're going to discuss the topic of experiencing boredom with your workouts or training regime. Perhaps you're feeling bored with your training, dreading your workouts, or even avoiding training altogether in some cases, and you're just not sure how to shake the feeling. I'm going to provide some handy tips and changes that you can apply to your training regime and routine, which can help get you out of your exercise funk. First off, I'm going to address the most obvious answer, incorporating variety, but I'm also going to discuss when implementing too much variety can actually be of detriment to your progress, depending on your goals, of course. Variety and structure in your program is essential for covering all bases, incorporating some exercise enjoyment into your training and having a solid structure to follow in order to experience measurable progress. If your current programming is rather repetitive in that your coach has programmed the same exercises over and over multiple times a week, or perhaps you are repeatedly training the same muscle groups yourself, like arms or upper body over and over again without paying attention to essential muscle groups such as your legs, or vice versa, maybe you're training legs over and over again. You've also got to remember, if your coach has programmed the same exercises multiple times in a week and you are, for example, a power lifter, this may actually be necessary for your measurable progression in that chosen sport and beneficial. Yes, it's going to be fairly boring, but actually rather necessary for the end result desired. Discuss with your coach, or at least approach the topic of incorporating variety into your current program from day to day across your week. Covering muscle groups evenly and giving yourself different exercises, or your coach giving you different exercises across your program, can prevent the feeling of monotony and also ensure you're covering all bases for a balanced physique and healthy mobility, stability, and strength evenly from side to side. A nice variety of upper and lower body workouts and exercises should incorporate a combination of compound and unilateral and isolateral movements, inclusive of some core work, isometric core work specifically, and certainly stretch and release work shouldn't be left out. A well-rounded program, especially in the case of progressive overload and muscle building and body recomposition, should see that a coach is using a variety of exercises which will complement one another to help prevent injury. For example, ensuring to include posterior-driven movements such as hip thrusts, as well as movements involving anterior extension of the hips such as deadlifts, and even alternating between these movements to prevent overuse of tendons, ligaments, and joints in a particular direction of movement, which may be a little bit too repetitive and bear a heavier load than tolerable by the joints and respective connective tissue. So if your coach has you doing, 8 different variations of a squat, and they've got you doing 6 different sets of each one of them, so there's a lot of load in exactly the same exercise, which is done slightly differently, this may unfortunately actually be a little bit more, exacerbating for the chance and risk of injury versus preventative thereof. Don't mistake this concept for extreme or unnecessary exercise variety from week to week, okay? As this can often actually sabotage solid progress. Some repetition from week to week will be required in order to track and implement progress effectively across weeks and months. Constantly changing your program may be incredibly invigorating and exciting, especially in a case where you might be engaging in perhaps F45 classes or CrossFit. I always reference those, I'm so sorry. But even with CrossFit, and with respect to, there's going to be some measurable lifts and movements which you will be aiming to progress with over time. With something like F45, this will fall more into that type of circus, no pun intended, circuit-based exercise, which will certainly be more of that category of a lifestyle training approach. So there's less progression, there's less room for progression with F45 for many reasons. However, because of the constant changing programming, despite being a lifestyle type of circuit training, it's enjoyable physically. But because of the constant changing programming from day to day, and more so from week to week, sadly, it doesn't leave a lot of room for progression, as I said, with weights training, especially if there's limitation on weight amounts that you can use available and reps allocated for the exercise in the class. So if you've been given a set amount of reps and you haven't got a rep range, and then you haven't got a heavier weight to be able to even work with, it can then often limit your progression, and you can actually reach a ceiling eventually. And sometimes as well, in a lot of cases, there are lots of injuries that can come out of specifically F45 and CrossFit. In turn, this can then mean you have less control over which muscle groups you're going to develop more of and which may lag behind. So when there's no actual structured programming, and programming specifically programmed to you and your specific goals, you will find that unfortunately you won't really have a choice as to which muscle groups are going to develop, because the programming is so random at these types of circuit style based training establishments, which will obviously have an impact on your aesthetic based body goals if you do have a specific goal to, say, for example, grow your leg muscles or your glutes or even your upper body. Some of the best bodybuilders with the most incredible physiques, even ranging from women's bikini athletes all the way through to men's bodybuilding, will in fact follow a fairly consistent and repetitive program from week to week and month to month, including myself. I have followed programs for literally as short as 12 weeks and as long as 25 weeks plus. And I would even be as bold to say that my current program is not too different from a program I've been following for about a year and a half. The only adjustments I've had to make are in instances where I've outgrown the exercise. So I've had to choose something a bit more difficult, or something where I can grip onto the piece of equipment a bit easier with the heavier weight. But in most cases, a lot of the changes I'm making to my program are more about injury prevention and progression with that particular movement than it is about having something different to do and something to excite my mind. There is no need to change exercises up dramatically if you are efficiently using the muscle groups that you need to be using and progressing nicely with your training. Don't rip the rug out from underneath you. And if you have found particular exercises that work very well for your own individual movement patterns, mobility and strength levels, sometimes you can actually find your sweet spot, and changing exercises to a different piece of equipment or entirely different exercises altogether may see that you actually hinder your progress in the previous lifts that you were progressing nicely with in the first place. I actually find this with my stiff leg deadlifts. I have never been able to effectively do them with a barbell without eventually injuring myself. Eventually I found out that it was just far more beneficial to switch over to a piece of equipment that I continuously found success with, which weirdly enough is a neutral grip wheelbarrow style stiff leg deadlift. And I have never injured myself using that piece of equipment, and I find I actually get the full range of motion that I require for that particular exercise, and I have a lot better time with it. So I find that if anything, I don't want to deviate away from that piece of equipment because I have success with it. As the old saying goes, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If you are struggling with the idea that weights training and bodybuilding style training is fairly boring and you like some extra variety, you may need to reassess your goals. Sometimes if you have conflicting goals, for example, to improve body composition and see more definition, burn body fat, create more of an X frame and larger glutes or even arms, for example, but then you also want to incorporate box jumps and runs into your program for no particular reason other than I just want to. Remember, the choice of exercise stimulus will have a drastic influence on your body composition. And sometimes, unfortunately, some forms of exercise, such as circuit training, high intensity training, or cardiovascular-based training efforts, may hold you back from progressing with building significant amounts of dense type 2 muscle fibers. And the major reason for this is because the exercise stimulus decides the type of muscle fibers that your body builds to adapt to that exercise stimulus to be able to do it again, okay? And when we see with type 1 muscle fibers, imagine they're like little strings of spider web, okay? There are literally thousands and thousands of them that make up the muscle tissue, but it's long and it's lean and it's slender. It's not very dense, okay? And that's why you see a lot of marathon runners are quite slim, but they will have a lot of type 1 muscle fibers to support that exercise. Now, when it comes to weightlifting resistance training, this is more conducive with the development of type 2 muscle fibers, which are much more dense and thick. So the filaments are much thicker. There are not as many of them though, so they take up a lot more room for each fiber. Now, you can have a hybrid of type 1 and type 2 combination, which is usually seen in athletes who are doing hybrid types of exercise. So, for example, you might be engaging in resistance training and running. Now, this isn't a bad thing, but again, it's going to develop an athletic look, but not necessarily have a specific outcome for growing specific muscle in specific areas of your body, such as what resistance training and split training is going to deliver for you. Not to deter anyone from circuit training, okay, or cardiovascular-based endeavours, or team sports for that matter. I have multiple clients who do team sports who are runners as well. We actually incorporate this into their programming, and I have no issue with this whatsoever. But it is important to understand that if you have a very specific aesthetic goal for yourself, and then you also have, these very vastly differing exercise enjoyment goals, sometimes these can unfortunately clash dramatically with one another. It's important to remember that there are going to be some exercises that you'll need to do which you do not necessarily enjoy that much, but will contribute more effectively towards the end goal, much like other principles in life, such as saving money to be able to buy a house or a car. Improving your financial situation means that you have to sacrifice something that you don't enjoy as much, not going out as much on the weekends, etc., for a long-term goal. And I will talk a little bit more about finding more enjoyment in the actual progress of your set program a little bit later in the vlog. On that note though, if you are looking at exploring different exercise types and you don't necessarily care that much about your physique and what the final outcome will be, it might be handy to break free from your comfort zone and experiment with some new activities. From dance classes to outdoor adventures, things like rock climbing, pole, aerial, there are a multitude of different choices to explore. There's a world of fitness waiting out there for you, especially if you have no specific aesthetic goals, okay? Embracing different forms of exercise can help you discover the exercise endeavor that you actually enjoy. And of course, there are going to be a myriad of health benefits to getting any form of exercise at all. So if you're chasing overall health and well-being, and that's the highest priority on your list, exercise variety and finding the right training style for you, outside of the gym maybe, or even incorporating a combination of, may be the best option to explore. You don't have to keep dragging yourself to the gym day in, day out, thinking that it is the only form of exercise that you can or should engage in if you have lifestyle goals that are not in relation to specific muscle growth goals. Having measurable goals, on that note, can be incredibly beneficial for giving you direction and purpose in your training life. Set clear and achievable fitness goals, okay? Working towards these milestones adds purpose to your workouts, making them more fulfilling. This may include increasing your weights or reps, or even improving your form, or TUT, so time under tension, in specific exercises. I've literally been doing lat pull downs, shoulder press and hip thrust amongst others for 10 years, and I avoid feelings of boredom with these exercises because of the desire to progress in either repetitions or increase weights each week, or even improving my form, okay? Perhaps every few weeks or months, depending on my calorie intake at the time, obviously will influence as to how my strength progresses. So sometimes I have to maintain strength and I just focus on form. The difficult part on focusing on especially numbers progression with training when you are eating in a calorie deficit is that you're probably not going to see that much of a strength increase unless you are a newbie to the gym. Some of us have been training for literally years on end, and engaging in a calorie deficit can see that the ultimate goal is usually just to maintain your strength with small increases here and there. It's not realistic to try and aim for anything else. And with a calorie deficit as well, it's going to have a little bit more risk of injury involved in attempting bigger lifts with more power involved. It's important in these cases to focus on quality sessions and the way that you feel during a session, focusing on where you are in the moment and congratulating yourself for simply getting through. Because most of the time when you are eating in a calorie deficit, it will be difficult enough to get to your sessions, to get through your sessions, let alone to get to your sessions and to get to the gym in the first place. So, pat yourself on the back for just getting through the session. Sometimes having a workout partner can completely change your mood and training dynamic. All of us have experienced that euphoria when training with a partner, okay? Hitting PBs and generally feeling like we're pushing that little bit harder with someone next to us. It can be crucial to rely on support from a training partner, especially in the beginning of a training journey, and you will find this can help us solidify habitual accountability with ourselves long term. Eventually, you'll be able to go solo and actually enjoy your workouts and find intrinsic motivation on your own. This is exactly why personal training still has great success in gyms as a profession, and even signing up with a coach can be a way of feeling like you've got someone on your side, in your corner, all the way through your journey. It's nice to have that second set of eyes and someone to push you that little bit further when you're lagging, becoming complacent, or doubting yourself. Explore using fitness apps, okay? They're life-changing, and online group challenges that inject excitement, accountability, and purpose into your routine. If you're currently not tracking your training via an app or an Excel spreadsheet, for example, you need to be. Coming from someone who didn't track their training for quite some time, and then I made the switch a couple years ago to tracking progression repetitively, I found a significant improvement in my training progress, my adherence, so actually turning up for my sessions and wanting to be there, and my relationship with my exercise routine as a whole. Ticking boxes and recording progress can return a feeling of accountability and accomplishment. We all know how it feels to cross things off a sheet for the day, at work, to be able to hand something in, an assignment in, to click the submit button. We get the same type of certainly internal and neurological response from entering in data and progression in a training program that you can then review later. So tracking your progress can also encourage you to level up from where you were previously, okay? So it gives you a marker to go by. Sometimes we can become complacent if we don't write down our goal and certainly don't hold ourselves accountable for weights and reps we're pumping out. So this is, I believe, as logical as, not driving on a road, so kind of just driving wherever and not having somewhere to go, not having a path. If you're tracking your progress and if you know where you were last week, well, then it gives you direction for this week and the week ahead, right? When you don't track your progress, you can sometimes fall into the comfort of, playing it safe and coasting without progression. And this can often lead to feelings of complacency, boredom, and lack of feelings of accomplishment. Oftentimes, we can hold ourselves back from progression when avoiding documenting our exercise selection and progression altogether. And we can get really lazy as well. We can forget exercises, leave them out. I don't like that one, so I just won't do it today. But for some reason, when you've got it on a spreadsheet in front of you or you've got an app to follow, leaving an exercise out just doesn't feel quite right. And then we can often doubt ourselves or even lose interest in our exercise and goals due to the fact that we literally have no record or visual information to reference for future workouts and attempts at PBs. So we start to lose interest in this imaginary, non-existent program that we have in our heads. This can also see that we may be engaging in a program over time that is no longer challenging for us. And this can also lead to feelings of boredom or pointless repetition. So if you've started like a bodyweight program, let's say, and you followed it for 12 weeks and you're starting to get bored with that, there might be a reason for that. It might be because you require progression from there. For example, a dumbbell squat may no longer be challenging for you after months of using this particular piece of equipment because you've got limitations with a dumbbell, right? You can't go heavier and heavier. There's only so much you can hold. And you may require a change of equipment, perhaps to a barbell or a machine, so you can add extra load and really challenge yourself. But without tracking and aiming to progress with the dumbbell squat, let's say you've just stayed stuck on the 10 kilos and you've just gone, you know what, I'm going to do day in, day out, or each week come in and do this 10 kilo squat for 10 reps and I'm going to leave. Eventually your muscles are going to adapt to that stimulus, and yes, you probably will feel bored going in there because it's not going to challenge your muscles and you're probably not even going to feel like you're training. You may simply coast there for months on end with the same exercise and weights and then wonder why you feel stuck or bored. It's because you don't actually have variety in your progression. That's where the real issue lies. So the next point is practicing TUT and movement control. So TUT is short for time under tension. Add in the challenge of practicing time under tension. It's actually in the name, increasing the time you spend in the most challenging parts of the movement. And I know I'm not talking about, the push out of something, for example. In some instances, yes, that can be challenging, but it's usually in the position where you can feel the most contraction of that muscle, and sometimes in the eccentric part of that movement. Getting the most out of your exercises, and resisting the urge to ego lift comes with implementing time under tension. Thinking less about the numbers and more about the mind to muscle connection, you'll feel the difference immediately and possibly find ways to improve the efficacy of your movement patterns to achieve the goals you actually have for your physique or your performance, okay? So instead of thinking about, I'm gonna lift this barbell above my head, get it as heavy as possible, sounds like CrossFit, as quickly as possible. It might be that, okay, if we're doing a shoulder press, for example, it might be less about getting a really heavy weight above your head and more about slowing down the repetitions and the movement to actually feel the exercise as effectively as possible in your shoulders mostly. This particular tip, okay, will apply more to those who've been training for consecutive months and years and possibly reaching a point where their strength is perhaps stagnant or they're chasing strength only without thinking about technique. And if you're a newbie, this is going to apply probably more for men than women. I found the most common thing I see with women is that they definitely always go in safe. They go in safe and they play it safe, and I actually think that's not terrible, but then they kind of stay there. Men are a little bit different. I find that they go in and they try to do, obviously they start off at a certain level of weights, but I see a lot of men loading weights far too heavily for what they're probably actually capable of doing in the earlier days and even later in their training program. It's like their ego is determined by how heavy they can lift, and it's not necessarily determined by whether or not they're doing the exercise effectively, not feeling it in their back, for example, or their neck or their ankles, and they're actually using the muscle groups they're meant to be using. It can be incredibly beneficial slowing down a movement and really milking every single rep. Now, don't get me wrong, it is a form of slow torture. It hurts. It hurts your muscles. But this can help you effectively execute an exercise and actually feel the resistance in the muscle group that you're meant to be training. Your muscles, and I've said this before, your muscles don't know how heavy you're lifting. Your muscles can't count. So all they know is when they're fatigued, okay? If you're fatiguing and you're feeling pain in joints specifically, it's probably less a case of reaching the actual muscular fatigue that you're looking for and more a case of ineffective form or possibly just loading the bar too heavily or the piece of equipment. Try counting down from 5 or 3, I usually like those, for your next compound movements in the hardest part of the exercise. So specifically at a lower weight than your top weight, okay, I can't give this advice to people who are doing, their top squat and they decide to slow that down. That's going to be a challenge. Practicing things like deficit deadlifts and controlled eccentrics on hamstring curls, bicep curls, and pauses with hip thrusts can be humbling, but beneficial for muscular progression and hypertrophy, okay? And these specific exercises, the reason why I talk about deficit deadlifts is that's what they're called. Controlled eccentrics on hamstring curls, bicep curls, and I'll add in chin-ups as well because that's another one that's beneficial to do that one for. And pauses with hip thrusts. So these are all different ways of being able to get the most out of that particular exercise. Can be humbling, but obviously, beneficial for muscular progression and hypertrophy. So I specified that because a lot of people think that, time under tension is just being as slow as possible for that particular movement. It's actually particular parts of the movement, doing them slower. And you'll know which part it is because you can feel the muscle group that you're meant to be training working its little butt off. This can often help us break past strength plateaus as well, okay? Because then you actually focus on developing the muscle before you then want to develop the ligaments and joints. And funnily enough, ligaments and joints, they actually form a lot slower than what muscular groups do. So we actually have to almost really work on the muscular side of things a lot more before we then attempt heavier lifts and tax the ligaments and joints too much. So, the next point, reward your efforts in some way or another. Celebrate your victories, big or small. Treating yourself, for achieving fitness milestones keeps the momentum alive and your spirits high. Try to steer clear of food-related rewards though. That's kind of counterproductive most of the time. And maybe celebrate your wins with a loved one or your coach, or perhaps with a new gym outfit or pair of shoes. You can even journal about your gym experiences. But a little bit of encouragement goes a very long way with literally any endeavor of life. Shake up your workout schedule, okay? Trying morning sessions, lunchtime workouts, or evening routines to find your ideal exercise time. You never know, your current training time may not work so well for you and your circadian rhythm. Perhaps your schedule is hectic and you're just trying to rush through your workouts with the way that you've currently got things structured. Just remember that you don't have to train in the morning to be a hero. You will not see me in the morning at 5 a.m. And by the same token, if your night schedule is driving you insane, perhaps going to bed earlier and getting up earlier for your workouts might be the solution. Change up your workout playlist is another one. Music can have an incredible influence on your mood. Sometimes if we're listening to something that is just too relaxing, or maybe just too intense. Depending on what our mood was when we went into the workout, it might be that this sets the tone for the training session and we still feel fairly flat and crappy about it. If you're unsure what mood you're in for your workout and what music will inspire you, try switching between a couple of genres at the start of your workout or before your workout to set the tone of your training session. It might take a couple of attempts until you find the genre that matches and elevates your mood, okay? So mine could go from R&B to heavy metal to, dance and house. And it actually just depends on what I feel like listening to, and I don't know that until I have it in my ears. Change of your environment, okay? So change it up. Is your current gym feeling stale? And maybe you keep running into the creepy dude, creepy Bob, that you don't want to talk to. Bob or Jane, I don't know. I like to just, one of those two, like maybe there's a creepy girl, maybe there's a creepy guy. It might be time to change gyms and give yourself a different environment to work out in. Oftentimes, this is why having a gym membership with location access to multiple sites can actually be super handy, such as Good Life, World Gym, Anytime Fitness, or even Fitness Cartel. This can provide you with the freedom to roam between locations and give yourself an opportunity to experience a different vibe, culture, and even simply change up your visual stimulus. And also too, if I listed a few gyms there that aren't in your country or your state, because I know I have some international and interstate listeners, I'm sorry, but they are the chains of gyms in Queensland and Australia. The major ones in Southeast Queensland. So obviously, as I said, it can provide you with freedom to roam between locations and give yourself an opportunity to experience a different vibe, different culture, and simply change up your visual stimulus, okay? So sometimes you're just bored of looking at the same shit over and over again, and the same people, and the same freaking equipment and crappy floor they don't repair, or whatever is annoying you about that gym. And it might just be nice to go to a different location. If you're working somewhere different for the week, or you're traveling, something like that, sometimes it is nice to just have a change of scenery. Improve your nutrition. You knew this one was coming. Improve your nutrition, sleep, and water intake. Nutrition, sleep, and water intake. You would be surprised how much nutrition and hydration and recovery, will influence your mood towards your workouts. If you're not taking care of the inside of you, it's going to drastically impact your moods, your performance, like the list goes on. If you're currently not consuming enough carbohydrates and protein, you may find that your recovery is rat shit and your performance will be lacking. And if you're not hydrated adequately or sleeping enough, this is a recipe for walking into a workout in a terrible frame of mind and performing terribly, which can impact your self-esteem dramatically and turn you off your training completely. In this case, you probably aren't looking forward to your workouts and you feel like they're dragging on with adequate nutrition and matching this up to your training. You will find you can actually enjoy natural progression and energy provision from the macronutrients that you require for your exercise, which can be an absolute game changer for empowering you to tackle your workouts. We've all taken caffeinated pre-workout and had some carbohydrates prior to training and felt like a superhero who could take on the world. And finally, you could look at hiring a trainer or working in with a coach, checking out some support, right? So trying to find something that keeps you accountable, okay? And having education can help you break past your distaste of your exercise regime. Getting outside of your comfort zone, opening yourself up to learning and having someone to answer to can be the biggest game changer in your health and training journey. So that's it for today's podcast. It's a nice and short one because obviously there are only going to be a certain number of ways that you can improve your adherence to your exercise program. And interestingly enough, I also spent a lot of time actually telling you probably don't need any changes at all. It's probably more about your attitude and your approach. Thanks a lot for listening to today's podcast and vlog, and I'm looking forward to doing another one for you soon. Thanks. Bye.